At the edge of the Theban cliffs, where the desert drops into the Valley of the Kings, another Egypt begins, the Egypt of ritual. Mainstream Egyptology sets Anubis within a disciplined funerary system, patron of embalmers, guardian of cemeteries, opener of hidden roads. The evidence is abundant: coffin texts that guide the departed, Book of the Dead spells painted on papyrus, wall reliefs that show sequences of libation, fumigation, blessing and sealing. Excavated embalmers' workshops reveal stone basins, drainage channels, natron storage, and racks for linen. Residues inside jars identify cedar oil, pistacia resin, conifer tar, and unguents. Priests shaved their bodies, fasted from certain foods, and washed repeatedly in water made sacred by recitation. The god appears not as a fanciful demon, but as order itself, jackal-headed, alert at the threshold, presiding over craft and purity. In this reading, ritual was technology, a tested, repeatable method to protect flesh, preserve identity, and prepare the traveller for judgment. Anubis's temple spaces choreographed this method with precision, from the House of Purification to the House of Bandaging. When we follow the mainstream trail through these rooms, we encounter people at work: measurers, binders, pourers, readers, each action reinforced by words believed to make reality stable. Archaeology reconstructs the sequence with craftsman's patience. The body arrives to the House of Purification, is washed, anointed, and packed in natron. Over weeks moisture leaves, and the form becomes a vessel for identity. Amulets mark nodes of protection: jed at the spine, heart scarab at the chest, wedjat at the brow. Linen is layered in measured bands. Resins and tars seal both scent and shape. The culminating rite is the opening of the mouth, presented in accounts as liturgy more than miracle. A statue or the rapt face receives the touch of an adze. Incense curls upward. Formulae restore sight, breath, hearing, and speech so the deceased may answer Osiris's court. Texts enumerate roles: sempriest in leopard skin, lector priest with scroll, assistants who pour, bind, and steady. Implements are catalogued: adzes, peseshkef blades, libation vessels, censer stands, their symbolism mapped against body and cosmos. Nothing demands occult speculation to make sense. The Egyptians, in this reading, practiced a technology of remembrance, fusing practicality with sacred language. Anubis presides as supervisor of procedure, ensuring purity, timing, and form. The result is intelligible even to modern minds, a community crafting memory into matter, so a person meets judgment intact, named, and recognized. Beyond this consensus, some researchers suggest a second layer carried by practice rather than doctrine. They propose that Anubis was not merely invoked but invited, an indwelling cultivated through breath control, droning hymns, sensory deprivation, and the darkness of inner chambers. Esoteric writers claim that masked priests used rhythmic stepping and incense saturation to alter consciousness, allowing the officiant to wear the god as a functional role. A few late papyri mention secret names uttered in isolation. Travellers like Herodotus repeat rumours of midnight vigils. In modern retellings, these hints become programs: guided trance, channeling, an initiatory ordeal designed to escort living minds across liminal thresholds. Yet the record is fragmentary. Mainstream scholars warn against stitching scattered phrases into novel systems, noting that performance and symbolism explain much without positing possession. Chemical analyses of balms account for aroma, architecture accounts for darkness, measured recitations account for reported effects. Where speculation reaches further into claims of necromancy, ecstatic shamanism, or occult continuity into later lodges, we will mark it as conjecture and ask what evidence would be required. The question remains potent because ritual does change minds, and some participants may have experienced a presence they unmistakably called Anubis, whether theological, psychological, or both. This series follows both paths with discipline. We begin with what can be shown: rooms, tools, texts, residues that reveal a method refined over centuries. Anubis, in this grounded frame, is the principle of order at the threshold, ensuring purity and timing while artisans transform a body into a resilient home for identity. Only after establishing that craft will we test edge cases, midnight rites, possession claims, and initiatory readings. flagging them as proposals and measuring them against inscriptions, archaeology, and comparative ritual studies. The goal is not to demystify the ancient world into procedure, nor to inflate every gap into secret doctrine, but to understand how a civilization engineered memory and meaning in the face of death. If mystery endures, it will be because the evidence permits uncertainty, not because we crave the exotic. If answers harden, it will be because patient scholarship supports them. Either way, the story remains human: grief, craft, words, and the steadiness of hands. Stand with us at the necropolis edge as torches are lit and processions assemble. Here begins our inquiry into the secret rituals performed in the name of Anubis, a journey that honours the record, tests the claims, and leaves room for the unknown. At the dawn of Egyptian civilization, before the pharaohs carved their names into stone, the deserts already carried the shape of a jackal's track. Mainstream archaeology places the birth of Anubis within the earliest necropolises of the Nile Valley: Saqqara, Asyut, and the ancient plain of Abydos, where scavenging jackals prowled the edges of human burial sites. To early Egyptians, this nightly guardian of the dead became an omen of protection, not menace. Excavations reveal ivory carvings and small votive figures, some over 5,000 years old, depicting a long-snouted figure standing watch over a wrapped corpse. The first inscriptions of his name, Inpu or Ampu, appear on tomb walls of the First Dynasty, identifying him as he who is upon his mountain, lord of the Western Necropolis. In this foundational era, ritual and survival were intertwined. Predators that disturbed graves became deified to prevent desecration. The jackal's presence offered logic and comfort. Where it walked, no lesser beast dared. Thus, the image that would become Anubis was born not from mythic invention, but ecological observation. Over time, the creature that scavenged the desert's edge evolved into a divine sentinel, guarding the liminal space between the living and the dead. By the Old Kingdom, Anubis had ascended from protector of graves to an essential power within Egypt's cosmology. Inscriptions in pyramid chambers call upon him to bind the limbs of Osiris, signifying mastery over resurrection. Reliefs in the tomb of Khufu's officials depict priests masked as Anubis presiding over funerary offerings. Archaeologists identify these images as ceremonial dramatizations of purification and sealing. The deity's colour, black, represented the fertile soil of rebirth rather than decay. Statues discovered at Saqqara show meticulous craft: wood inlaid with obsidian eyes, linen collars painted with ochre, and hieroglyphs carved for stability of the soul. The iconography remained consistent for nearly 3 millennia, suggesting a theology deeply rooted in practice. Mainstream scholars interpret this consistency as cultural engineering. Anubis became the visual grammar of transition, ensuring continuity across generations. When embalmers invoked his name, they summoned reliability, the god who never failed to guard the threshold. The Old Kingdom's texts reinforce this pragmatic faith. Anubis, thou who watchest the body, make firm the road to the west. His presence ensured that order, not chaos, governed death. Some researchers, however, propose that beneath the public cult of the tombs, an esoteric stream survived, a vision of Anubis not merely as guardian but as psychopomp, guide through inner transformation. They point to the recurring phrase, opener of the ways, in coffin texts, arguing it refers to an inner initiation experienced by priests. In this view, early ceremonies near Asyut involved trance states induced by rhythmic chanting, darkness, and aromatic smoke, allowing initiates to walk the path of the dead while still alive. The so-called dog-star connection, cited in later Hermetic writings, is sometimes tied to Anubis's celestial role, linking his symbolism to Sirius, the star whose heliacal rising marked the Nile's renewal. Yet this theory remains speculative. Mainstream Egyptologists counter that such alignments reflect cosmic order, not mystical experimentation. The absence of any formal doctrine describing priestly trances or celestial journeys keeps these claims within the realm of hypothesis. Still, the persistence of the Opener of the Ways title suggests that, at minimum, ancient Egyptians saw Anubis as the living bridge between seen and unseen worlds. Across millennia, the figure of Anubis evolved through layers of myth without losing his practical role. When Osiris rose to prominence as the resurrected king, Anubis yielded his seat as lord of the dead, but remained indispensable as embalmer and judge's attendant. Artistic continuity through Middle Kingdom stele and New Kingdom papyri shows him performing the weighing of the heart, a tableau that codified Egyptian morality. Mainstream interpretation views this as theological equilibrium. Osiris represents divine judgment. Anubis ensures procedural fairness. Yet some fringe historians suggest this shift hides a deeper syncretism, where Anubis's original supremacy was deliberately subdued to align with the royal ideology. They argue that priestly schools preserved secret hymns describing Anubis as the first god who measured truth. No definitive evidence of such texts exists, though fragmentary hymns hint at older dominance. What endures is the universal image of balance, jackal-headed guardian steadying the scales between heart and feather. Whether seen through archaeology's lens or mysticism's mirror, Anubis embodies the human need to believe that death is not chaos, that every passage has a guide. Hidden beyond the bustling plazas of the living stood the quiet sanctuaries of Anubis, places the Egyptians called Perdeshare, the Red House, where only the initiated dared step. Mainstream archaeology reconstructs these as purification temples adjoining embalming workshops, sacred yet practical. Excavations at Sinopolis and Thebes reveal narrow corridors lined with limestone basins, drainage channels and low benches carved for ritual washing. Pottery residues contain traces of natron, myrrh, cedar oil and bitumen, ingredients still detectable under microscopes. Reliefs show priests in linen skirts and leopard skins pouring water over altars while reciting formulae from scrolls. These were not dark magic rites but carefully ordered sequences: cleansing, fumigation, anointing, sealing. Each stage mirrored cosmic order, ensuring that the body of the deceased echoed the restoration of the world itself. The silence recorded in inscriptions, "None shall speak save the lector," suggests focus, not secrecy. Through repetition and cleanliness, the priests sought to make their craft divine. To ancient Egyptians, purity was power, dust and decay symbolized chaos. Within these walled chambers, the scent of resin and incense was not theatrical. It was technological, a method to halt decay and stabilize eternity within flesh. The architecture of the Temple of Silence reflected precision. Thick walls muffled sound, corridors funneled movement, and narrow light shafts allowed only thin beams to enter. Archaeologists identify two distinct rooms, the House of Purification and the House of Bandaging, each aligned with specific ritual purposes. The embalmers moved between them in prescribed order, their shaved heads gleaming with oil, their bodies washed in natron. Tools found within: bronze knives, reed brushes, alabaster jars, matchless in surviving funerary manuals. Mainstream interpretation views these as controlled environments designed for hygiene and order in a desert climate, ensuring minimal contamination. Yet inscriptions invoke divine oversight. Anubis is present upon his mountain, overseeing the ceremony. This duality, practical and spiritual, is what defined Egyptian ritual craft. What we call embalming was to them the rebuilding of the cosmic body. The hieroglyph for purification, a priest pouring water over a figure, doubled as the sign for rejuvenation. Each motion in these rooms held symbolic symmetry. As they purified the corpse, they renewed the world. Some researchers suggest the silence of these temples concealed more than discipline. They propose that the priest entered altered states through sensory deprivation, rhythmic chanting, and perfumed smoke. The structure's acoustic isolation may have amplified heartbeat and breath, inducing trance-like calm. Textual hints, phrases such as "he hears the voice of the god in stillness," are interpreted by alternative historians as evidence of mystical communion. In their reading, the embalming chamber became a laboratory of consciousness, where initiates learned to see with the eyes of Anubis. These interpretations often draw parallels to later mystery schools in Greece and Hermetic Egypt. However, mainstream scholars caution that such inferences rest on poetic metaphors, not instruction manuals. The chemical function of incense explains the described sensations. Architectural design explains the acoustic phenomena. No record confirms that Egyptian priests sought transcendence through self-induced trances. Nonetheless, the idea persists because these spaces, even in ruin, feel otherworldly. Tombs within tombs where sound dies and time slows. Night falls differently in a temple like this. Modern archaeologists who descend into preserved chambers describe an immediate hush. The way breath becomes audible, the way flame seems suspended. Whether one accepts mystical interpretations or not, the effect is undeniable. In such places, the ancient artisans worked by lamplight, transforming perishable bodies into imperishable forms. Their silence was both necessity and devotion. Speech might stir chaos, a single wrong word might unbalance the rite. The Temple of Silence thus stands as testament to an Egypt where craft, faith and environment converged into one seamless system. Mainstream research grounds it in labour and logistics. Alternative thinkers hear echoes of meditative science. Perhaps both are true in different registers, the measurable and the experiential. For those who have walked those narrow halls, one truth remains clear. In the stillness, the presence of Anubis is felt not as apparition, but as precision made sacred, order given breath, silence given voice. The opening of the mouth ceremony stood as the pinnacle of Egypt's funerary science, a synthesis of engineering, faith, and precision. Mainstream Egyptology views it as a structured ritual reenactment, not a supernatural event. Within the tomb complexes of the New Kingdom, especially in the Valley of the Kings, murals show priests restoring the senses of the deceased so they might eat, speak, and breathe in the afterlife. The Sem priest, identifiable by his leopard skin, performs the gesture with an adze touching the statue or mummy's lips. Tools recovered from burial caches, bronze blades, adze heads, libation vessels, correspond closely with these depictions. Textual fragments from the Book of the Dead detail invocations like, "My mouth is opened by Ptah, Anubis hath loosed the bonds." Each phrase mirrored an action, turning ceremony into choreography. Archaeologists analysing soot traces and incense residues confirm these were literal events performed in sequence, not symbolic pantomimes. The ritual unified priestly ranks, lector reading spells, assistants pouring libations, and mourners chanting the cycle of rebirth. To ancient Egyptians, the act was not superstition, it was craftsmanship granting continuity of breath. Through word and motion, they believed order conquered silence once again. Inside these tomb chapels, torchlight amplified the drama. Frescoes depict the moment vividly, Anubis standing beside the deceased, one hand steadying the bandaged body, the other guiding the priest's gesture. Mainstream interpretations treat this as the sanctification of technique, the artisan priest aligning divine order, ma'at, with human skill. Archaeological layers around embalming tables reveal bronze adze marks on wooden effigies, residue from wine and milk libations, and traces of ochre pigment used to awaken features. The ceremony ended with sealing the mouth and eyes, marking the completed transition. Even in its most practical form, it was theatre with purpose. The opening of the mouth existed to bridge the gap between ritual and reality, ensuring that a preserved body could receive offerings, hear prayers, and speak its name to eternity. Inscriptions remind us this was not for grandeur but necessity. Without voice, the soul could not respond to Osiris's judgment. Without response, salvation was incomplete. The ceremony made immortality a tactile process. Some researchers suggest a deeper stratum beneath this orthodoxy. They argue that the opening of the mouth also functioned as a form of spiritual initiation for the living, where priests, acting as conduits, symbolically resurrected themselves through their service. Ancient metaphors like breath enters again through the nostrils of the just may, they claim, describe ecstatic experience. In these interpretations, Anubis becomes less a guardian and more an inner guide through transformation. Certain fringe writers even liken it to proto-breathwork rituals, using rhythm, incense, and controlled sound to induce altered states. However, Egyptologists stress caution. The texts never instruct priests to seek trance or self-resurrection. Instead, their precision implies disciplined professionalism rather than mystical abandon. Where esoteric readings perceive self-initiation, mainstream analysis sees devotion to procedural perfection, a sacred craft requiring emotional restraint. The question, however, lingers. Could mastery of ritual itself have opened consciousness, even unintentionally, to profound states? In the Valley of the Kings, the evidence still whispers. Tomb walls bear soot fingerprints beside scenes of Anubis and the adze. Altars remain aligned exactly as ancient manuals prescribe. When modern archaeologists reenact the sequence under lamplight, they describe the atmosphere as charged yet tranquil, a sensory blend of smoke, silence, and echo. Whether one believes in transcendence or technique, the outcome is the same, a ritual that allowed mortals to imagine command over death. Mainstream history calls it funerary performance, alternative thought calls it communion. Perhaps both readings meet in purpose, to ease the passage between two states of being. When the adze touched the lips and the incense rose, what truly opened may not have been only the mouth of the deceased, but humanity's enduring hope that death itself could listen. Among the most haunting relics of Egypt's sacred craft are the masks of Anubis, gleaming visages of black and gold worn by priests who officiated over the dead. Mainstream archaeology interprets these artifacts as ceremonial costumes, symbolizing the presence of the god, not tools of possession or trance. Excavations at Saqqara and the Ramesseum have uncovered fragments of gilded wood and cartonnage shaped into the long muzzle and alert ears of the jackal. Some masks were lined with linen or soft leather to rest on the wearer's head during lengthy rites. Paint analysis shows deliberate colour choice, deep black to signify rebirth through the fertile Nile silt, gold to invoke divine radiance. In tomb murals, the Anubis priest appears alongside the mummy, guiding purification and sealing, his mask reflecting torchlight like a living effigy. Egyptologists identify this as performative theology, an embodiment of divine order through costume. When the priest wore the mask, he enacted the god's vigilance. It was theatre of reverence, not transformation. Each element, colour, proportion, gesture, reinforced the ideal that humans could serve gods through precision and presence, rather than mystical merging. In the workshops adjoining these tombs, the mask creation was itself ritualized. Artisans carved wood or moulded linen soaked in plaster, layering pigments mixed with ochre, soot, and gold leaf. The same craftsmen who fashioned coffins and canopic lids often built these headpieces, embedding lapis or obsidian chips for eyes. Archaeologists examining one specimen from Saqqara found inscriptions etched inside the rim, short protective spells to keep the breath pure and banish decay. Such details suggest a practical sanctity, the craftsman's blessing over his own work. Mainstream interpretation emphasizes material mastery, the mask as functional regalia ensuring visual continuity between priest and deity, just as statues served as vessels for divine presence. The mask made the priest a visible stand-in for Anubis during ritual performance. It allowed worshippers to witness cosmic order enacted before them, a physical representation of unseen authority. There is no evidence the priests believed themselves possessed. Instead, they maintained the god's image through disciplined impersonation, maintaining separation between mortal and divine. Yet, some researchers propose a more experiential dimension. They argue that the mask, when combined with incense chanting and the closed environment of the embalming hall, may have triggered altered states in its wearer. The narrow eye slits, restricted airflow, and rhythmic movement could have induced trance-like focus, a condition easily mythologized later as channeling. Late Ptolemaic inscriptions describing the living Anubis conducting funerary rites have fueled speculation that initiates believed temporary union occurred between god and priest. However, mainstream scholars counter that these phrases were devotional hyperbole, similar to saying, "the hand of the king acts as Ra." No surviving manual instructs priests to summon possession. Still, the tactile intimacy of the ritual, the heat, the scent of myrrh, the muffled sound within the mask, invites empathy for those who wore it. In that silent enclosure, performing the motion of the jackal-headed god, some may indeed have felt presence pressing close. Whether psychological or spiritual, the experience left a human trace that endures in every gilded fragment unearthed. The legacy of these masks extends beyond archaeology. When archaeologists uncovered one in the Ramesseum cache, its gold leaf still glinted despite millennia of darkness. Reconstructed under museum light, it revealed fingerprints of the artist trapped beneath the lacquer, an immortal signature of mortal devotion. For Egyptologists, such finds illuminate the unity of craft and faith, how artisans, priests and theology converged in this image of control over decay. For others, the mask represents a doorway, an interface between worlds that no translation can entirely explain. Mainstream science restores its context as ceremonial regalia. Speculative thinkers see an ancient technology of identity, where wearing the god was both role and revelation. Perhaps both readings describe facets of the same truth, that humans, in facing mortality, create mirrors of divinity to endure their own impermanence. The Mask of Anubis, then, was not simply a prop of death, but a statement of life's resilience, an art form that let eternity briefly wear a human face. When the sun fell behind the cliffs of Abydos, a different Egypt stirred, a world ruled by torchlight, drumbeats, and the watchful eyes of the jackal god. Mainstream historians acknowledge that nocturnal funerary rituals were a standard feature of the New Kingdom through the Ptolemaic era. Darkness was not sinister to the Egyptians. It symbolized renewal, the realm from which rebirth emerged. Archaeological surveys near Abydos and Thebes reveal open-air enclosures with burn marks, pottery shards, and fragments of oil lamps, evidence of night processions. Greek chroniclers like Herodotus and Diodorus mention that certain priests performed rites of Anubis by torchlight, though their accounts mix curiosity with superstition. The rituals likely served practical ends, maintaining sacred fires, warding off scavengers, and preserving the secrecy of embalming formulas. In temple reliefs, Anubis stands at the doorway holding a torch and staff, guiding the soul into Osiris's presence. This was not sorcery but symbolism, the measured transition between death's shadow and divine light. For the mainstream scholar, the Night of the Black Jackal was an orchestrated vigil, not a séance, a moment when priests embodied watchfulness itself, ensuring no impurity crossed the threshold of the dead. The geography of these rites reveals how sound and light shaped emotion. Excavations at Abydos have uncovered crescent-shaped walls that enclose sacred courtyards used for funerary reenactments. Charcoal layers and torches made from acacia wood attest to repeated night ceremonies. Egyptologists suggest that the glow of hundreds of flames reflected on white limestone created an atmosphere both solemn and scientific, bright enough to work, dim enough to inspire reverence. Texts refer to the burning of resins before Anubis and the dance of the torches, phrases describing coordinated movement, not frenzy. Participants carried censers, sang hymns in measured rhythm, and formed circular processions around burial pavilions. The timing coincided with celestial patterns. Certain rites began as Orion and Sirius rose above the desert horizon, aligning the world of men with the gods of rebirth. From a mainstream perspective, this harmony of fire and star symbolized order, conquering chaos through ritual design, turning the desert night into an architectural instrument of faith. Still, some accounts edge toward the uncanny. Herodotus writes of travellers who heard voices in the necropolis and saw lights moving like eyes. Alternative researchers interpret these passages as evidence of trance ceremonies held in isolation, priests chanting invocations to draw Anubis's spirit into presence. They note that limestone corridors amplify sound and that rhythmic drumming can produce mild hypnosis. In this interpretation, torchlight became both tool and symbol, its flicker guiding participants into altered states where the boundary between performer and deity blurred. Speculative writers point to later magical papyri describing the summoning of the guardian of the gates as a survival of these mysteries, yet the evidence remains circumstantial. Mainstream archaeologists remind us that echoing voices and wandering lights could easily result from acoustics and refraction in dusty air. Without explicit ritual texts prescribing invocation, the nocturnal rites remain grounded in remembrance rather than summoning. The debate thus pivots on perception. Was the black jackal a metaphor of vigilance, or a real presence sensed through sensory ritual? When modern researchers revisit Abydos at night, the landscape itself seems to speak. The wind hums through tomb openings, jackals still prowl the ridge as they did millennia ago. Torchlight tests the same walls that once framed ancient ceremonies. Whether viewed through empirical evidence or imaginative reconstruction, the scene converges on one truth. The Egyptians built environments where sacred order could be felt, not merely understood. Their nocturnal vigils fused architecture, astronomy, and devotion into one sustained act of continuity. Mainstream history defines this as a funerary performance maintaining cosmic balance. Alternative perspectives see it as a human attempt to breach the unseen. Between both interpretations stands the enduring figure of Anubis, the silent watcher who needs no temple at noon because his hour belongs to the night. Under that darkness, torches still flicker in the imagination, carrying the echo of hymns once whispered to the god of thresholds. At the heart of Egypt's great necropolises, between the tombs of nobles and the corridors of kings, another kind of guardian stood watch. The priests of Anubis, keepers of both the physical and spiritual boundaries. Mainstream archaeology identifies these men as tomb protectors, ritual custodians who ensured that offerings continued, intruders stayed out, and purity remained intact. Tomb inscriptions call them imi-ut, he who is in the place of embalming, and Web priests, those who are pure. Their work extended beyond mummification. They maintained the sealed thresholds that separated sacred from profane. Excavations at Thebes and Deir el-Medina have revealed warning texts etched near entrances, "Cursed be he who disturbs the eternal rest." Egyptologists interpret these not as supernatural threats, but as legal and moral deterrents against tomb robbery, psychological security systems of their age. In the torchlit corridors, these guardians repainted hieroglyphs, refreshed offerings, and performed renewal rites to keep the tombs spiritually charged. The vigilance of Anubis was thus expressed through human agency. To guard the dead was to uphold Ma'at, cosmic order in miniature, replicated in every doorway and sealed chamber of the necropolis. The evidence for these protective systems remains vivid. Archaeologists uncover small scarabs carved with symbols of eyes and gates, fragments of limestone plaques inscribed with phrases like, "Anubis stands before the portal." Ritual pits contain broken bowls and burned resins, offerings meant to re-sanctify disturbed spaces. In the Valley of the Kings, the placement of false doors and narrow corridors served practical and symbolic ends, confusing thieves while mirroring the journey of the soul through successive thresholds. Mainstream interpretation sees in this a blend of architecture and theology, where defense and devotion intersect. The priest's duties were both custodial and spiritual. They managed airflow, humidity, and offerings with the same precision used in ritual incantation. In their world, even maintenance was sacred labor. Each barrier, each lock of stone stood as a tangible affirmation that eternity required structure. The black jackal's vigilance was no longer mythic, it was institutional. Alternative researchers, however, propose that some of these protective designs held deeper ritual significance. They point to gate spells within the Book of the Dead, texts describing 21 gates of the underworld, each guarded by a name and symbol. In their view, the priests of Anubis were not only caretakers but initiates reenacting the soul's passage. The inscriptions and sigils near tomb entrances may have doubled as initiatory markers, forming a sacred map that mirrored the underworld's geography. Some fringe historians even suggest that energy or sound frequencies were used within these chambers to seal them ritually, a claim unsupported by material data but persistent in speculative literature. Egyptologists, by contrast, emphasize the functional explanations, echoes created by architecture, not ritual harmonics, symbolic language, not coded energy systems. Yet, the persistence of these theories reflects the allure of mystery, the sense that guarding the gates meant more than physical protection. It was a metaphor for safeguarding knowledge itself. Today, the legacy of these guardians survives not only in texts but in the artifacts left behind. Curse tablets, stone seals, and painted jackals line museum cases, silent witnesses to a civilization obsessed with continuity. For archaeologists, they reveal a highly organized system of security, both mechanical and moral. For believers in the esoteric, they hint at an ancient priesthood versed in binding rituals meant to maintain balance between worlds. Both interpretations speak to a timeless human impulse, to guard what is sacred from decay and violation. Whether by stone barrier, inscription, or spell, the message endures across millennia: respect the threshold. In this meeting of discipline and devotion, Anubis remains eternal, the god who teaches that every boundary between life and death, mortal and divine, is a gate that must be both built and guarded. The watch continues, even as the sands reclaim his temples and the torches burn low in chambers meant never to be opened again. As Egypt's old faiths waned and foreign rule took hold, the worship of Anubis did not vanish, it transformed. Mainstream historians trace this evolution through the Greco-Egyptian fusion of the Ptolemaic and Roman eras, when gods of the Nile were reimagined in Greek language and iconography. In cities like Alexandria and Hermopolis, Anubis appeared beside Serapis, Thoth, and Hermes, his jackal visage reshaped into more humanized forms. Archaeological finds confirm this blending. Bronze statuettes combining Greek drapery with jackal heads, altars inscribed in both hieroglyphs and Greek, and tomb murals where Anubis stands next to Hades as co-rulers of the underworld. The Greek magical papyri, collections of spells and invocations discovered in Egypt, contain references to Anubi the Aicopomp, summoned to guard necromantic operations. Egyptologists interpret these as cultural borrowings, where ancient symbols acquired new philosophical meanings rather than continuing secret cults. The evidence suggests adaptation, not survival in hiding. Anubis had become a concept of cosmic transition, a figure both Egyptians and Greeks could recognize as the ultimate guide between life and death. In the cosmopolitan swirl of Ptolemaic Alexandria, temples of the older gods stood beside libraries and observatories. Priests now read hymns in Greek, students debated Plato beside hieroglyphic tablets, and mystery schools wove together Egyptian ritual and Hellenistic philosophy. Mainstream scholarship calls this an intellectual synthesis, a convergence rather than corruption. The hybrid statues of Anubis Serapis symbolize not occult rebellion, but spiritual diplomacy, an effort to bridge faiths under one divine language. Archaeological excavations at Kom el-Shukafa catacombs reveal murals depicting Anubis in Roman armour, performing embalming beside Greek inscriptions of eternal life. This imagery was not heresy but evolution, a multicultural society reinterpreting its oldest metaphors. The black jackal had crossed linguistic borders, his presence adapting to empire. To historians, this demonstrates the resilience of religious imagery, its ability to endure by changing shape. What once guarded tombs now guided philosophy, shifting from temple floor to metaphysical text. Alternative theorists, however, see in this continuity a deliberate preservation of hidden rites. They cite the Greek magical papyrus invocations of Anubis, opener of the mysteries, and the rise of hermetic sects that practice meditative resurrection rituals. Some claim that Egyptian priests facing cultural extinction encoded their secret liturgies within philosophical allegory, teaching rebirth as a spiritual discipline rather than funerary rite. In this reading, the Hermetic axiom as above, so below, echoes the logic of Anubis's dual realms. There is circumstantial evidence, amulets bearing both Anubis and Hermes symbols, late inscriptions referring to the initiates of the black god and Roman-era accounts of nocturnal initiations. Yet mainstream Egyptologists caution restraint. The papyri reflect individual magicians, not organized priesthoods. Their language is eclectic, merging Egyptian, Greek, and Jewish traditions. No direct lineage from pharaonic Anubis cults to Hermetic schools can be proven. Still, the symbolic resonance is undeniable. Where temples fell, philosophy became sanctuary. The god of embalming now embalmed wisdom itself, preserving it beneath layers of myth and metaphor. Today, scholars of religion view this period as a hinge between worlds, the end of the Temple Age and the dawn of esoteric philosophy. In the ruins of Hermopolis and Alexandria's catacombs, archaeologists recover fragments of bronze masks, broken ritual bowls, and multilingual inscriptions that speak to faith in translation. For the empiricist, these are artifacts of cultural exchange. For the mystic, they are breadcrumbs of continuity, proof that the old current still flowed underground. The truth may lie between. The forbidden continuum of Anubis endures not in secret lodges or hidden scriptures, but in the persistent human desire to make death intelligible. Every culture that inherited Egypt's symbols, Greek, Roman, Hermetic, even Christian mystic, recast the jackal's vigilance into new forms of guardianship. Whether as theology or metaphor, his presence survived empire, conquest, and time itself. Anubis, eternal guide, passed unbroken through the corridors of history, teaching once more that the path to eternity is never truly sealed. Whispers of a forbidden text, the Codex of Anubis, have long haunted the margins of Egyptology. Mainstream historians approach the tale cautiously, noting that no verified manuscript by this name has ever surfaced. The story emerges from early Byzantine records that speak of monastic scribes at Wadi el-Natron discovering scrolls of the dead god, which they destroyed to purge remnants of paganism. Archaeological excavations in the region confirm the presence of Christian monasteries built atop abandoned necropolises, but no papyrus fragments bearing Anubis's name have been found. The most credible source is a 6th century letter written by a Coptic abbot warning against those who read the words of embalming and summon spirits of the West. Egyptologists interpret this as polemic, a metaphor for heretical fascination with ancient funerary texts. Yet, its tone hints at real anxiety, the persistence of knowledge that refused to die. Mainstream consensus holds that the Codex of Anubis was likely an imagined heretical text, a Christian-era projection of fear toward the still potent symbols of Egypt's mortuary heritage. In this reading, the Codex exists not in libraries but in memory, an idea born from tension between old gods and new faith. Even so, rumours of hidden manuscripts have fueled centuries of speculation. In the late 19th century, travellers and treasure hunters reported finding scrolls in desert caves near the Fayum and Wadi el-Natrun, inscribed with jackal-headed figures and cryptic passages. Most of these accounts trace back to unreliable colonial-era adventurers or dealers seeking fame. Mainstream archaeologists have debunked them, showing the supposed fragments were likely funerary extracts from the Book of the Dead, repurposed and sensationalized for sale. Still, the myth persists because its imagery is compelling, a secret manual describing rituals too dangerous for the pious. Some fringe researchers claim that monastic chroniclers may have indeed catalogued an authentic late pagan liturgy, later lost or suppressed. The evidence, however, is circumstantial: burned libraries, incomplete catalogues, and second-hand rumours. Egyptology's challenge remains clear. Between legend and artifact lies a gulf easily filled by imagination. Alternative theorists push the narrative further. They propose that the Codex of Anubis was not destroyed but hidden, encoded within early Coptic or Hermetic manuscripts. Some identify passages in the Greek magical papyri and Coptic Gnostic codices that reference the guardian of the West or the one who weighs the hearts of men. They argue these fragments form a composite memory of Anubian wisdom, rituals for inner resurrection translated into Christian mystical language. Others claim the Codex was smuggled to the West during the Crusades, influencing medieval grimoires. No material proof substantiates these theories, but their endurance underscores a truth about cultural memory. Suppression often breeds myth. Where the archaeological record is silent, storytelling fills the void. Mainstream scholarship acknowledges that some late Egyptian funerary knowledge did persist in Hermetic and alchemical writings, yet none show continuity with a singular codex. Still, the idea of a lost book containing the god's last secret, how to speak across death, remains irresistible. Today, researchers returning to Wadi el-Natrun sift through monastery ruins where smoke once erased what parchment preserved. Fragments of papyri, charred and indecipherable, hint at countless texts never catalogued. Radiocarbon dating confirms widespread destruction around the 4th to 5th centuries, aligning with campaigns against idolatrous writings. Whether the Codex existed or not, its legend embodies the moment when two civilizations collided: the literate priesthood of Egypt and the ascendant faith of Christendom. For archaeologists, the quest reveals the fragility of transmission, how easily knowledge vanishes beneath conquest and sand. For storytellers, it proves that ideas, like gods, seldom die completely. The lost Codex of Anubis may never be found, yet its echo survives in every myth that refuses to fade, every forbidden text that promises revelation, and every whisper reminding us that silence too can hold a story. When the sands finally closed over the last temples of Egypt, one might have expected Anubis to vanish into myth, yet history shows otherwise. Mainstream scholarship traces the jackal god's endurance through art, literature, and ritual imagination long after his cult ceased. 19th century excavations at Saqqara and Thebes sparked Egyptomania across Europe. Museums filled with statues of Anubis, his sleek form becoming shorthand for the mystery of death itself. Victorian funeral art borrowed his imagery: black-clad mourners, dogs carved as grave guardians, while spiritualists invoked the embalmer of the soul in séances. Scholars of religion explain this persistence not as secret worship, but as fascination with continuity. Anubis embodied what modern science could not replace: the promise that the boundary between life and death was navigable. His image travelled from tomb walls to textbooks, from amulets to literature. In this mainstream account, the god survived because he symbolised professionalism, precision, and protection, the same qualities Egypt's priests once revered. Each generation reinterpreted him not as deity, but as metaphor for the eternal human task of guiding the unknown. The modern rediscovery of Anubis also unfolded in laboratories and archives. Forensic archaeology owes much to the embalmer's legacy: preservation through chemistry, structure, and respect for the dead. Egyptologists handling mummies today use infrared imaging, resin analysis, and digital reconstruction, techniques that mirror ancient priorities of purity and order. Museums in Cairo, London, and Berlin display reconstructed masks and ritual tools, reminding visitors that these were instruments of science long before the term existed. Mainstream curators present Anubis as symbol of conservation, an early emblem of humanity's drive to understand mortality empirically, yet the line between reverence and curiosity remains thin. Visitors often speak softly in his presence. Guards note how crowds linger longest before his statues. Even in sterile halls, his stillness commands quiet. It is as if the ancient function persists. Anubis continues to oversee the space between living observer and silent artifact, maintaining order within the modern temple of glass and light. Alternative perspectives extend this endurance into the esoteric. Occult societies of the late 19th century, Rosicrucians, Theosophists, and later Hermetic orders, revived Egyptian motifs as initiatory symbols. Their lodges featured black and gold imagery, and initiates swore oaths before statues of the jackal god. Some modern esoteric groups claim an unbroken spiritual lineage, reaching back to the embalmers of Thebes, asserting that Anubis's rites survive as meditations on rebirth. Historians find no evidence of such continuity, yet the symbolism resonates. In Jungian psychology, Anubis appears as archetype of transformation, guiding consciousness through inner death toward renewal. Popular culture echoes this endlessly. Novels, films, and games resurrect him as guardian, villain, or teacher. Though fiction distorts detail, its persistence shows that collective imagination still seeks a psychopomp, a guide through darkness. Where academic rigor ends, myth begins its own afterlife, carrying the same question that haunted Egypt's priests. What happens when we cross the threshold? In this closing reflection, the story returns to the valley where it began. Night over Thebes, torches flicker against carved walls, and the jackal silhouette remains. Mainstream history concludes that Anubis's power lies in endurance through interpretation. God, symbol, idea, all evolving with humanity's need to confront death with order instead of fear. Alternative readings insist his spirit persists, unbroken across ages. Perhaps both are right. In every generation, someone guards the gates, archaeologist, monk, scientist, or seeker, and in each role the same principle survives: vigilance at the boundary. The mystery of Anubis endures because it speaks to what remains unsolved in us. When the camera pulls back from the ruins and the desert folds into shadow, the viewer is left with neither revelation nor closure, only awareness. The God who never left still watches, patient as stone, reminding us that every ending is simply another beginning waiting to be opened.